Here is one mistake I do not want to see you make when growing tomatoes. It's a simple one, and it all comes down to your fertilizer. Let's go. So I hear gardeners all the time talking about how beautiful and green their tomato plants are. And I want you to stop and realize one thing before we continue with this video. And that is the most important, most important tidbit of information that you can get from this video is that green does not always equate to fruitful. It might mean healthy. Green does mean healthy, but green does not mean fruitful. And there's a really important distinction in that because a lot of gardeners think the greener their plant is, the healthier the plant will be, and therefore the more fruit they're going to get. And that is not always the case. Prime example has to do with nitrogen. And that leads me to the meat and potatoes of this video, which is that I really want you to understand how fertilizer affects your tomatoes. Because yes, green can mean healthy, but green does not mean fruitful. And what I really want to get with that is that sometimes as gardeners, we focus so much on overall plant growth and the plant looking super healthy that we fail to realize that a tomato plant, its secondary objective is to produce fruit. Its primary objective is to grow and survive. Its secondary objective is to produce fruit because the fruit has seeds which then can be future offspring. And so if there's no incentive for the plant to ever produce fruit, it will produce very little fruit. It's going to focus mostly on growing, thriving, looking beautiful, and that's amazing. But we hear from gardeners all the time that say, Luke, my tomato plants are super healthy, they look incredible, they're 6 feet tall, but I'm hardly getting any tomatoes. And I default to how much are you fertilizing? What are you fertilizing with? Because you could be fertilizing with something very gentle, but too frequent, or you could be fertilizing with something very heavy on nitrogen, very fast acting, very plant available, and the plant's just going nuts, right? And so those two scenarios you need to understand. We're using Trifecta Plus. Trifecta Plus is a very balanced fertilizer. It is intended for organic gardening, but you can use it in any style gardening. It's what we fertilize our entire garden with. We fertilize everything with it. It's our fertilizer of choice, and we absolutely love it. But we want to make sure that even when using something like Trifecta, we're not using it too frequently. One application is all we really need for the whole season. When it's used correctly, about a quarter cup per plant for heavy feeding plants, that should last enough from planting in the ground until the plant is basically done for the year. In doing that, we're ensuring that the plant has enough nitrogen to be happy, but not too much nitrogen that it's encouraged to just only produce foliage. In early season, you'll notice that the plants, they grow very quickly. And so giving them excess nitrogen in the beginning is definitely okay. It's understanding when enough is enough. And that's really what I like to kind of focus on when I'm fertilizing my plants, is that I do want to get the plant up and growing, right? I want to build the infrastructure because a healthy, large infrastructure can give me overall a larger, healthier plant, which then can give me more fruit. But if I continue to focus on that, that's where the problem arises. So when the first thing that you'll notice is when you're fertilizing with a lot of nitrogen, you're going to see a lot of beautiful growth. It's going to grow very fast, and it's going to produce growth very, very rapidly. But you'll also notice that on like a tomato plant, it's going to produce an absurd amount of suckers. The suckering occurs from the fact that it can only grow up so fast before it starts saying, okay, well, I can start prioritizing side growth as well. So you'll get a lot of extra side growth, which causes you to have to come through if you're single stemming your plants and pluck those suckers off. If you're not single stemming your plants and you're letting them just bush, that's great. And so then it comes time to when do I stop? Well, when I stop fertilizing, I fertilize in like I am right now. I just planted these about a week and a half ago, and I'm coming back and I'm top dressing and I'm scratching in the fertilizer. I did about a quarter cup per plant, and I'm only fertilizing once. If I came back and I thought that the plant might need more fertilizer, that can happen from time to time. If you get a really heavy rain, or sometimes if your soil is very depleted in nutrients, it can happen. It certainly can happen, especially if the plant is heavy feeding like a tomato is. You might need a second feeding, but that second feeding should not occur after the end of July. If you're getting into August and you're feeding with a very heavy nitrogen fertilizer intended to boost growth and get the plant growing, that should not be something that you do, because what you're going to do is you're going to re-stimulate that growth, and you're then going to transition the plant from what would be a natural fruiting cycle into more of a growing cycle again. And that can take some time for the plant to use up the nitrogen, realize that it needs to start setting fruit before that transition happens again back into fruiting. And by then you've missed most of your window. So I never, under any circumstances, fertilize a second time after July. That's just me, that's here in Michigan. You might be slightly different, but I also go by the fact if the plant is at least 4 feet tall, no more nitrogen. I don't focus on any nitrogen at all. I might give it bone meal if I think it needs to flower more. I might give it some potassium, but the first feeding of trifecta is my first feeding and usually my only feeding. After that, I go by plant height or by the date. End of July usually. I'll get about 4.5 feet tall tomatoes, and I don't worry about fertilizing anymore after that with an all-purpose fertilizer, because it's just going to it's going to be fighting me rather than helping me. And there's a second problem that can arise from using too much nitrogen. Besides the overgreening of the plant and the fact that it's going to produce less, another problem that you can actually face is, believe it or not, you can actually encourage aphids. There have been several studies done that show that increased nitrogen levels actually increases the presence of aphids. And that's because aphids hone in on tender young green growth. And when you're fertilizing with nitrogen, nitrogen encourages growth. And that means that growth, as it starts to form, is going to be tender and young, which is exactly what those aphids are honing in on. And so you can actually be not only encouraging pests, but also decreasing yields. And I want to kind of finish off this video by stressing that fertilizing is important. We're fertilizing now. We encourage that you fertilize as well, because you will get a healthier, more productive plant. But it's really the how and the why. Understanding your plant's response to fertilizer, what it actually will do for your plant, some of the positives and the negatives that can come from it. You know, there is so much information out there about the importance of fertilizing, but I rarely hear people talk about some of the negatives. And I think that's really what I was hoping to get out of this video, what I hope you got out of this video, because I see so many gardeners that just have that mentality. And I also had that mentality. I am by no means saying that like I was perfect from the beginning. I thought the bigger the plant, the healthier the plant, the greener the plant, the more productive it'd be, the more tomatoes I'd have. And that goes for all plants, by the way. I mean, I thought my bean plants, the bigger and greener they were, the more beans I'd get. Isn't always the case. I thought my peppers, bigger, greener, isn't always the case. Sometimes it's about balance. It's about understanding the seasonality, what season they're in, transitioning from a growing phase to a fruiting phase, understanding how long that typically takes, at what point that happens. That's all super important. It's all very, very nuanced to if you should fertilize. And I guess the final thing I'd mention is that I know you're probably going to ask, okay, well, Luke, if you fertilize once with trifecta, what happens if you have to fertilize a second time? And I did touch on this, but I want to kind of reiterate this and drive this point home. If my plant is already really tall, 4.5 feet tall, and it already has that infrastructure built, I'm not going to use trifecta again, because all I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving it more nitrogen, and that in turn will fight me. What I will do is I will come back with some bone meal, some potash, maybe some calcium, maybe some gypsum, something like that to help with blossom end rot later in the season. I'll kind of assess what my plants might need in terms of an amendment. I might top dress with some compost for a very gentle fertilizer. It kind of gives them a little bit of nitrogen, just kind of keeps them happy, but gives them all those other things in slow doses, small amounts as well. I might do those things. I might mix up some compost tea, which is very gentle. We've done videos on that. There's really no wrong way to refertilize. My main focus though is just not taking something that specifically has, undoubtedly has nitrogen, throwing that on with the intent to reboost growth. There's one tiny little bit of information though, and that's the only time when I would default to adding a little bit more nitrogen after the plant is tall and it's, we're getting into August, and that's if the plant is turning yellow. That's the only time. If you're starting to notice that your top growth is starting to turn yellow, that is a nitrogen deficiency. That is saying I am deficient in nitrogen, and rather than produce more fruit, it's just going to struggle and be stressed and die. So that is, again, that's the only time, and that's pretty rare. That might have only happened in past 20 years of me gardening. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times. So it does happen, but it does not happen all the time. And so that's the only time when I would come back and I'd fertilize with some more just all-purpose fertilizer, is if the plant was turning yellow. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments box down below if this video helped, what you learned, and if you've made that mistake of thinking that a bigger, greener, healthier plant was going to yield more, and it in fact didn't. I'd love to know. So as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel reminding you to grow bigger. I'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider clicking this one. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. Also, if you haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free, and we upload videos every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. We also have vegetable seeds, fertilizer, or tools. If you need any of those, consider visiting MIgardener.com. Links will be in the description box below. We've got you covered. And as always, we'll see you all in the garden. Take care. Bye.